Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Savvi Recruitment podcast. So today's episode, we're going to talk about gender diversity specifically. Now, we do appreciate, obviously, diversity is much broader than just gender, but we're going to focus in this episode just on gender diversity. Some of the things we see in the market, obviously, it's a huge emphasis for all companies in terms of hiring, and we absolutely see that, as many others will, in terms of to produce a diverse shortlist in terms of candidates that we're representing for any role. It's timely because after probably over 2 years of a delay now, the Individual Accountability Framework Bill was published at the end of July. So this is the bill, and hopefully, well, projecting it will be enacted by the end of the year, hopefully, that will bring into force the central bank's proposals around a senior executive accountability regime. It also is proposed that they'll be able to strengthen their kind of administration sanctions against individuals who hold looking like people in PCF type roles are going to be the ones that fall in under that regime. A little bit more clarity around who's going to fall into the first tranche of this bill or this act when it is enacted. So credit institutions, insurers and high risk investment firms. So they're projecting about 150 firms in the first initial wave will be impacted by this bill. But they do intend to broaden that out over a number of years. So if you're listening and you don't fall into that category, or your firm doesn't, it's definitely something that's still coming down the line for you if you're a regulated financial institution. And I suppose the gender diversity angle on that is that really this bill was proposed by the Central Bank of Ireland after they conducted the Culture Report on the retail banking sector in Ireland in 2018. And again, finding massive failings there in terms of decision making, as we'll all be aware, but very much attributing that in a large part to the lack of gender diversity at a senior management and a board level within those institutions. So again, the central bank, not skirting around it in terms of the importance of diversity of thought and experience in terms of good decision making, and I think very much risk appetite, and making sure that there's balanced views around the tables that are making decisions, particularly in regulated financial institutions. So again, there's a couple of things that make this just a timely topic for us to visit. So what we're going to do, we're just going to look at some practical things around what firms can do to increase gender diversity, and then also look at just what we're seeing in the market in terms of maybe challenges from our perspective. So today I'm joined by Therese Cadell, my partner here in Savvi Recruitment, John Ennis, who's a director with the business, and then Natasha Welehan, who will be a new face. She joined us a few months back. So Natasha's first time. So again, just bringing you through some practical tips in terms of being able to increase gender diversity and also our observations of what we see in the market. So Therese, I might start with you just in terms of practical things that you've either seen or that you've seen to work, I suppose, that firms could do as a first step in improving gender diversity.
Thanks, Jen. Well, I think you start at the beginning and you look at your current headcount and I suppose assess where you are regarding gender at the moment. Having done that type of audit, I think it's those numbers will be fairly transparent. Like everything, like any process, you need to set some goals and targets. So, and with that, bearing in mind the positions you have and the different functions you have, you've got to establish realistic yet reachable gender diversity goals for the organization, right? And once you've established them, then it's ensuring that you have the metrics in place, okay, to track your progress and I suppose quantify the work. So look, I'm going to keep this simple. That's the first point. Look at the numbers, look at where you want to get, and put your process and procedures in place.
Yeah, it's like any other target that a company has, whether it's financial or otherwise. You've got to start with a target. Everybody's got to know where they're driving towards, rather than just kind of aimlessly going, okay, yes, we want to increase gender diversity. What does that mean? What does that look like? So no, that makes a lot of sense. Natasha, from your side of things, then what else would you recommend firms do?
Well, I think Therese hit the nail on the head. Start where you are, see what needs to be done, but then you need to start at the beginning of the actual recruitment process, which is candidate attraction. So take a look at your job descriptions, take a look at your job ads, review them. And I think there's a lot more awareness out there now around the language that we're using in our job ads, and say masculine coded language and feminine coded language, and the impact that can have on the pool of people that you're reaching. So, there's some really handy like tech tools. I'm not the techiest person in the world, but there's some really handy tools out there. There's an app called Text Analyzer, another one called Text.io. Now, you can do free trials on those, but otherwise they're paid subscriptions. If you just want something quick and easy, I would say take a look at Gender Decoder. It's a website, you go on, drop your text into it. It flags to you, are there words that are masculine coded, words that are feminine coded? The reason it's important to know this is there is quite a lot of research out there that says if an ad is very masculine focused in terms of the language that's being used. And these can be words you might not have even thought of, like competitive would be a masculine coded word. Ninja, really, really popular word at the moment. Everyone's a ninja, especially in the tech industry. That's a masculine coded word. But these words, this language in the job ad can actually put women off applying. Whereas there is research that says if the ad is feminine coded, men just aren't really bothered. The other thing is looking at the actual job ad itself, looking at the list of requirements within your job description and your job ad. You know, don't have a really long wish list. Keep it focused. What do we actually need this person to have to be able to perform the duties of the job? Again, there's research out there that says that women tend not to apply for jobs unless they feel that they can do that they tick every box on the wish list, whereas men will apply if they tick 60%. So, if it's not necessary, just don't put it on there. You are impacting who's applying to your job ads. Also AI, look, it's, everyone's talking about AI these days and the use of AI within recruitment processes. It can have its place. It's very useful in terms of, booking like interviews and so on, but AI can be used to try and remove bias in terms of using AI, using algorithms to actually select from the applicants and attempting basically to remove human unconscious bias. So yeah, that's a new one. It seems to be happening in a few businesses. I haven't tried it myself. I'm not too sure what anybody else thinks about the use of AI.
Haven't seen it being used
Yeah,
a huge amount. I suppose the
large
applicant
tech
tracking
businesses.
systems and stuff use those kind of ones. But like you've
Yeah.
got to be careful again. From my reading on it is you have to be a little bit careful because the people who are building the AI may have be building in bias as well, just in the algorithms, and that
I
can
would
then
agree on that.
so it's not a fail-safe method either, I guess.
No. I would agree on that. And the other thing I would say about AI, it's definitely something that's happening. We are seeing it. Like my other half works in tech, possibly more in those large tech multinationals.
Yeah.
I would say one of the things and the caveats around using AI, as you say, perhaps people are putting in within bias when they're building the algorithms. It's also to understand what AI actually is. It's trained, like AI looks for patterns, so it could actually end up reintroducing bias into your system.
Yeah, ironically.
So, I'm not convinced about AI myself, but I do think the other, like looking at your actual job descriptions, looking at your job ads, looking at the language that you're using, it's a very simple way of trying to appeal to a wider pool of applicants from the outset. So that's one of some very
And I think that's the thing.
there.
I think sometimes this feels like maybe a mammoth thing that firms have to try and, overcome and bring it in. But as we're kind of talking through here, these are relatively simple things that can be done that could potentially have a very dramatic impact in terms of, to the numbers of men and women that are applying for particular jobs. The other thing that, I suppose theoretically I've read about, but I don't see really in practice, but I don't know, maybe firms do it on the inside and we don't see it, but is to remove clues towards from a CV that indicate gender or ethnicity or educational background or whatever it might be, and actually just removing, anonymizing the CV from that perspective and just letting it first screen the hiring managers look at a CV for the merit of the experience alone. Because again, what we're talking about here is creating safeguards around unconscious bias. So I'm sure anybody would say, look, no, God, that doesn't impact my decision making when I'm looking at a CV, whether it's male or female or ethnicity or, education, did they go to the same university? But there's lots of scientific research around things like confirmation bias and everything that feeds into the fact that we're just human. I think there's no point trying to eradicate all unconscious bias, but you need to acknowledge there will always be an element of it there regardless. So you need to put the safeguards in place just to make sure. And there's a really good, popular kind of example of people auditioning for an orchestra in the US, and the questions started to arise on why is there more men than women in the orchestra. The people who selected the orchestra would have absolutely hand on heart said it's completely on the merit of the music. It just so happens that there's better male musicians that we're seeing over female ones. And what they did was they introduced, so they made everybody audition behind a curtain, and just to test it. And what do you know? Turns out that the orchestra composition over time, when they started to audition behind the curtain, turned out to be more 50-50 and more of a reflection of, pretty much kind of equal numbers of men and women at that professional level of music. So again, it's not that people are going out to do this, and it's not trying to point the finger at people and say, look, you're it is unconscious. But again, because it's unconscious of people, we're not aware of it. We're not seeing it. So it just shows you that very, very simple things can just help to create a framework and safeguards around the impact of unconscious bias, because it is there and it is happening, and there's no point saying otherwise.
Jen,
John,
I hope you're not going to introduce that on the interview process, are you?
Behind a curtain.
All candidates sit behind a curtain. But another point on that is diversity in your hiring panels, to ensure that you've diverse, when the interviews do happen.
And it comes back to what Natasha was saying about language, because even how somebody explains their experience or talks about things, women, again, we're generalizing here, but they tend to be more communal. They will talk about we more often than I. We're more, again, we're conditioned, but that's what women are meant to be more, sort of collaborative, and that's kind of so. Again, language, to a male interviewer on the panel, they might perceive that as, oh, well, I don't know what they did, you know what I mean? So you do, I think that's a really good point. If you have a diverse panel, then there's a balance of feedback around that. But also the consistency around, and talking to a client at the moment on this, around competencies, and having a framework in your interviews for what you are testing for in terms of competencies, so that interviewers are asked to give their feedback within a framework of competencies with real life examples of where that person demonstrated. And again, it's just eradicating the potential for, I just like them. them. You know what I mean? That there's actually
got a good vibe.
Valid, and look, you do have to get a good vibe. I'm not saying you don't, but to get consistency between first and second, when maybe have 4 different people meeting a candidate, you need to create a framework where there's transparency, where there's a consistency around what people are being judged on, and that, again, it just helps when 2 people sit down and go, but I didn't see that and I didn't get that example. So how can you say they're strong in that competency? Just it's given it more concrete, sort of foundation for when you're making these hiring decisions. And it's, again, another safeguard. John, you had one more there you wanted to bring in.
But just in terms of, like, I mean, if you look at the market that we're in, like, not just in Ireland, but globally as well, being a very candidate short market, everybody's complaining, that it's very tight. And this is, like, not just a very useful exercise, in terms of, we need to do this for diversity and inclusion, perspectives, because it's been proven that, the more diverse a company is, the more innovative it is anyway. So it's not just about being doing it for regulatory purposes. I know in this case it is they're forcing it a little bit upon the financial services firms in this case, but it will actually benefit these firms as well to have a diverse leadership group across gender, ethnicity, race, and that as well. So to put quotas in place, but also just from a practical point of view, anything that we can do to widen that talent pool will actually help us as well, in terms of broadening that out. And, like, I think there are practical steps that we can take as recruiters and firms can take in-house as well, just in terms of the channels that they use as well, that they're not just using their traditional channels, they're widening them out to include, like, disability sites or autism sites, different types of women in work sites as well, that they're advertising their positions across a number of channels that might bring a wider pool of candidates into where they usually get them from, and that will probably bring a more diverse network or pool of candidates in as well. And then I think it's going back to training the people who are going to interview them or select them in terms of looking at them, and looking at their skills rather than being influenced by where they went to school, what gender they are, what their name is, what they speak, like educational, that type of thing. So it is bringing that in, and I think a lot of companies have done well, I think, on the diversity and inclusion, in terms of we see a lot of positions within the HR function, especially, people leading that out and providing training on that, so that people, I suppose, understand what it's all about, about. And then I think in order to drive it through the organization, you just really need the support from management in order to do that, because they're the ones who control that. And if they, as you said earlier, Therese, if senior management are putting quotas and targets and really looking at it and driving it through, then it will filter down, and policy will begin to be shaped by having that in place.
Yeah, as I said, look, you have to create the awareness, you have to put the target in. And again, it's like any other target that you've set for people within your business that they take, seriously, like a financial target or whatever it might be. But you're right, it comes from the top down in terms of setting that tone.
But we are seeing it more and more that we're asked for, like, for where's the diversity in our shortlist, and is this a key focus for us? And it is challenging at times, so there's no doubt about it, especially within the financial services sector, particularly, I think it's very challenging sometimes, especially from a gender perspective.
Yeah, and we were going to touch on that in terms of, obviously, look, people are probably listening to this more for the practicalities. I think a lot of us will have read, and in theory we know, and but the practicalities of making these things happen, it takes a bit longer, and it's not necessarily easy, and it's not a quick, flick the switch and it happens. Is around what we're seeing, when we go to market, and obviously our mandate is, and inherently we're female owned and run business predominantly by Therese. Obviously, John, you're here as well, but it is important just inherently to us, obviously, that we would always think of that, irrespective, that we're producing a gender diverse shortlist. But there are challenges around that, and I know, John, you wanted to speak just to some of the things. Just again, we're generalizing, but that again, it's a trend. It's kind of what we would predominantly see.
Well, I think from a recruitment perspective, when you go to market, and you're looking for a 50-50 shortlist, even on male, something as simple as male and female, it can be certainly, in my experience, more difficult to get the same amount of women for the same amount of role, simply because I think a lot of times men will be much more open to having a discussion about a role, even if they're happy in their role. Whereas when you approach a woman about a role, oftentimes, and not every time, but they will shut you down if they're not actively looking for a role. And in the market at the moment, a lot of people aren't applying anyway. So a lot of what our work is proactively approaching people to see if they're open to a new opportunity. And I find men tend to say, well, no, I'm quite happy where I am, but, tell me a little bit about the role. Tell me what the salary is. Tell me who's hiring. Tell me why they're hiring. And they'll have a whole conversation for 20 minutes with you about the role, even though they say at the start they're not interested. Whereas women, predominantly, I find, will say, no, I'm not interested, thanks very much, and they'll put the phone back down again pretty quickly, and that's the difference. So you've got a much better chance as a recruiter, getting more men into we might have a chat, and then filtering through that as we go along. And whereas the women that you get will actually potentially be the ones who really are actively looking, but there'll be a smaller amount of them, because at the moment the market is quite buoyant. People are working away quite happily. Anyone who really wanted to make a move has had the opportunity over the last couple of years to make that move. So it is difficult to get the 50-50 shortlist in, of people, from my experience, that they just won't jump unless they're actively looking,
Yeah, I would see the same. I would totally agree with you as a woman. And no, look, people on this screen will know my bugbear when it comes to women, particularly even when you get them in a process and they come and maybe they get an offer. There's so much more they bring to the table in terms of guilt, maybe over a manager that they feel they're going to let down by handing in their notice, or, I've been here a long time and I'm going to leave people high and dry if I leave. And look, it's great. It makes you a very nice person and you're very considerate. But is that the best way to decide things for you, from a career perspective? And I would be very strong advocate of, it's a contract of employment, and it's about fair exchange. It's about what are you getting from it as much as what are they getting from you. And there was always, it should be a constant reassessment for somebody about that fair exchange. Am I still getting out what I wanted to out of this role? Have I stagnated? Have I stalled? Have I plateaued here? Is there an and what I would say, again, coming back to your point, John, is if somebody calls you and goes, are you open to an opportunity? You should always be open to an opportunity. Always hear somebody out about the opportunity, because how do you know? You could be happy, but how do you know that there isn't something, and again, maybe a new entrant to the market, something you hadn't even considered that somebody is interested in your background for? I just say, look, there's no such thing as a wasted conversation. And again, what I see women kind of going, I don't want to waste people's time. I don't want, like, if I go and meet them, it's nearly like them saying to us, yes, please share my CV, is them saying, I will accept the role if offered the role. And that's not the obligation. That's not the bar from our point of view or clients, because clients are very well aware, as you said, John, in this market, that there's nobody actively looking, particularly within the areas that we would do a lot in, like finance and risk and compliance. Nobody's actively out there. They've moved already. So they just want to get you to the table. And we are telling clients, then it's your job. You've got to put your best foot forward in terms of selling your opportunity to this person. So if you're out there and you're thinking, God, I don't go forward for things because I don't want to waste people's time, please stop thinking like that. And if something even just piques your interest, have the conversation with the recruiter, but definitely go to the table if you're at least interested, and find out for yourself a little bit more before you shut the door on it. Because again, as you said, it does impact our ability to kind of put more people, and it's amazing the amount of, and John and everybody else here, the amount of men who will be like, nah, actually there's enough, I'll go and have a chat with them anyway. And they come out then going, do you know what? Yeah,
I really want that.
I really want it.
I think
it's human nature.
I think the female loyalty thing is huge to the people within the organization. And certainly what I see in CVs, if they've stayed in one place for over 5 years, maybe 8 to 10 years, and they move, you then will see them moving maybe every 2 to 3 years, because they realize there is life outside of where they initially started, and that it is a corporate entity you're working for. You can always meet your colleagues for lunch and stay in touch with them as you move on. So it's just to think, maybe a little bit selfish and think what's best for yourself rather than what's best for others.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah, men are a little bit more Mayfain. I'm sorry, John, you probably agree with me. You
I
could speak
think
for the male
I
population.
do, but I think they probably just value the networking part of their working life a little bit more, and they see it. They probably see interviews, like a lot of them, and I think they're right even if they're not really that actively looking for a move, they see it as a good chance to meet somebody from a competitor. They see it as a good chance to network. They see it as a good chance to find out a bit of information, and then it can often turn to, actually, I really want it, but it often doesn't start out, and curiosity will bring them to the table a lot of times.
But also it comes back to, look at why there are not more women at senior levels. Again, coming back to that point of networking, because you just market intel, like benchmark yourself. You're having a conversation about a recruiter who's contacting you because based on their experience, they feel you're a suitable profile. So don't knock yourself out of the race because you don't feel it. Take their steer. But also, what are they paying? What's the budget for this role? Is that consistent with what you're getting paid? Knowledge is power. The next time you're going in for your annual review, again, you have to be out there. You have to know, and you have to go into those conversations in a very, very commercial mindset around, this is what I know my skill set is valued at in the market, not I feel or whatever. I've talked to a number of recruiters. I've either been for a couple of interviews, I've had a conversation with a couple of our competitors. I'm happy where I am, but I do know the value of what I'm doing and what my skill set is worth in the market. So again, there's a few things there that are very valuable, and that again will encourage more women to, in a very commercial way, bat up and make sure that they're talking themselves up internally where they are. So it's not just about, I don't want to make a move, but it's like, this could help me where I am in terms of me going for that next promotion or looking for that next pay rise. And again, because we see more men than women willing to do that kind of keeping their head always up and out, I do think it's a big part of why, and again, we have gender equal pay legislation coming in there for certain big companies. So again, there's a lot I think that women can do in terms of being more proactive about that. And certainly the only way you know your value is being in the market, being out in the market, and not always keeping the head down. And just relying on, if I deliver on my job, that's enough. And it just isn't, you know what I mean? You'd love to say, but once you get to manager level and above, it's less about the delivery on the day-to-day basis. It's equally important the network you have, both in your organization and outside your organization, for you to get ahead.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So I think we're kind of nearly coming up on time there, but I think we've kind of covered, as what we hope to do was to come on, I suppose, frame it in terms of obviously the individual accountability framework. It's a timely topic. It's always timely, and there's lots of things out there in financial services where we predominantly work. Unfortunately, isn't one of the better industries for the gender diversity at a senior level and board. It just isn't. Hence, the central bank have come out and will have powers when this bill is enacted to make significant changes to it. We have seen them pushing back on fitness and probity and interviews around PCF approvals, using the mechanisms they have had to date to do what they can around it, even though that might not have been overtly said. It's certainly what we would have seen that they have been doing successfully, I would say. Same with the INED circle, a lot more women coming onto the INED circle. And again, that would be pushed by the central bank in terms of their preference to see more women. So look, it is great to see. We are seeing change. We're definitely seeing the mandate there. But again, just to flag some other very practical, straightforward, relatively simple things that firms can do to help increase gender diversity in firms. So thanks very much, everybody. And we'll leave it at that.